This is the Transition Spire. It's a seriously slack 29-inch wheeled enduro bike, packing 170 mils of travel front and rear, but the numbers don't say it all. So let's see how it gets on.
Let's check out the Spire. I'm riding the side's large Carbon XT build. We'll start with geometry, and at 5'11", this bike is a little big. It has a reach of 485. I've been riding bikes with a 475 reach, so I got used to it, but it still feels a little big. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially when it comes to stability. On the subject of stability, it has a 63-degree head tube angle. Wow. I've been riding bikes with head angles around 64 degrees, and while the slacker head tube is noticeable, I'm not confident it made a difference on my day-to-day riding, just on the steepest or maybe fastest terrain. It's even adjustable to 62.5 degrees. My DH bike isn't even that slack. We'll talk more about climbing, but the effective seat tube angle is 78.1 degrees and the chain stays at 448. I'll also mention the stack/head tube length, since that threw me off on the last bike. This bike has a head tube length of 110 and a stack of 628. That still put the front end lower than the Evil, but not necessarily as low as the Trek, especially when you account for the Transition coming with a 5mm rise stem and 35mm rise bars. Altogether, the Spire was easy to get along with, even if it felt a bit larger than the other size large bikes I've ridden. On to the build. I've said it before, but I love some of the Transition builds. This XT build comes with Fox factory suspension, XT brakes, and DT Swiss XM 1700 wheels. These are the things that matter the most to me, not the electronics or the XTR drivetrain. The base GX carbon bikes have TRP DHR Evo brakes rather than lower spec SRAM codes, and it has Performance Elite suspension rather than just Fox performance. These are the important things for people who just want to ride. Across the build, you also get great Schwalbe tires with super gravity casing, soft or ultra soft compounds, good cockpit components, wheels, and a bash guide. That may be a bit of a tangent. All this to say, after adding some volume reducers to the suspension and cush core to the rear wheel, it was off to the trail. After a few rides, I also swapped for a carbon handlebar and a 210 dropper.
So let's start with how this bad boy climbs. With a super steep seat tube angle and long chain stays, you are positioned well in the center of the bike. I would easily compare it to my EX, even though the efficiency doesn't quite feel the same. But when it comes to climbing, three things really decide it for me. Those are going to be efficiency, traction, and switchbacks. Like I said, the efficiency isn't quite as good as some bikes like the EX or shorter travel bikes, but you're not going to suffer too much chasing your buddies up the hill. While the efficiency may not be up there with the fastest bikes, the traction is. With the Float X2 on the back, you have a huge amount of adjustability, and this thing will clop any rooty trail or slab. When it comes to switchbacks, I have a few in mind that I try bikes out on all the time. And to be honest, most bikes take one or two tries, especially some of these slacker enduro bikes that don't have quite as steep of a seat tube. And while you would think the long chain stays would have a negative impact, so far I've still been able to make some of the gnarlier switchbacks I've tried. So for traction and switchbacks, I would definitely give this bike an A+. For efficiency, maybe a B+, maybe even an A-. It's not bad. And compared to other bikes in this category, all in all, this is probably the best enduro bike I've ridden uphill. Getting into the fun stuff. We'll start with speed and chunk. The stability is there in spades. My biggest complaint with the Sentinel was the stability in the rough. It felt great getting up to speed, but as soon as it got chunky, I was holding on for dear life. The Spire does not suffer from this feeling. It never blinked or winced. If you want a bike that'll give you the confidence on the gnarliest descent, look no further. The tremendously slack head angle and the amazing Fox suspension make quick work of everything in their path. Riding steeps and slabs was never an issue. Yeah! Woo! Finally, jumps. It's one of my favorite things to do on a bike. The Fox Float X2 is a very cool shock and can be easily set up firm for high-speed jumps, then spin a few dials and the traction is on par with the coil. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a downside on smaller and more trail-sized jumps. It just felt a bit numb. It likes to go straight in the air and requires a bit more muscle to play with. There's a trend here in Washington to build enormous jumps. If you've seen Blue Steel, then you know what I'm talking about. They also just opened some at the Port Gamble Ride Park, and if you know where to look, you'll be surprised what you can find in the woods. These jumps may be best suited for a DH bike, but the Spire is also capable. The solid frame, stability in the air, and that speed got me out of a number of bad situations and saved me from some harsh landings. Final thoughts? Riding with friends around the Northwest, I am constantly disappointed when I think I am getting comfortable with the terrain. I keep showing up at new trails, staring down a new line, and my heart is pounding. There are a couple moves in this video that I had never done or only done once, but after riding them on the Spire, I went back and rode them multiple times on the EX. It just gave you all the confidence. Fortunately or unfortunately for me, this cycle will continue, and the Spire is a great companion for that. So who's this bike for?
Ain't nothing to it.
If you want to push the limit of speed or your limit on features, then the Spire will give you the confidence to release the brakes and send it. It also just climbs so well that it's a good one-bike solution if you're interested in resort riding and big trail days.
So how do I not crash? All right.
Enduro races, check. A-line, check. High Alpine, check. XC or endurance race? Probably not. Having fun, sessioning features, and making the most out of a long day in the saddle is what the Spire does best. Please like and subscribe.